Yeah, everyone can hear. That's good. Probably see as well. Apologies for the slightly chaotic start here and this ridiculous kind of setup we've got here. Google/YouTube have, like a couple of weeks ago, I found a workaround like about half an hour ago. The problem with it is that we can't stream the computer screen. So that's why we've got this camera pointing at the screen. And that's what you're looking at. So I've got a version of it on my screen right now, and it's legible. The quality's okay. Actually, a really good thing for all of you watching online is in YouTube, in the link that I sent you, change your stream settings under the little kind of cogwheel at the bottom. Change the quality to 720 HD or even 1080 HD, and you'll get a much better quality image coming through. Just for your benefit, Andy, just so there's a group of us here. Obviously, you can see everybody here. There's a group of people online as well, so they can hear us. Anything that's said. We need to avoid tapping on that table too much because that microphone is going to pick up everything. The students online listening, they may throw comments, questions. I'll speak those out because I'm monitoring that for you. Yeah. And as usual, for anybody, you can jump in at any time with questions and comments.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm happy just to meander my way through stuff, and if you want to divert me away from my meandering things, that's fine.
Great. So let's make a start with like proper introduction. This is Andy Lomas. Now I don't want to move the camera around to point it at Andy so everyone can see because
I could introduce yourself.
Yes, you could. You could kind of go and stand right in front.
Hello.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, this is Andy. Andy has a significant and extensive CV, including
that sounds embarrassing.
Including several Emmy awards as well for previous employments.
Minimum that qualifies as several.
Yes, two qualifies as several. For work you've done in the film industry, in special effects.
Well, actually, technically that can't be because the Emmys are for TV work.
Oh, okay. Of course, Emmys for TV. Yes, of course. Sorry.
I worked in TV and film for a few years.
You're a practicing artist, and you're going to talk to us about some of that work that you've been doing here. But a significant thing was the Lumen Prize about 5 years ago, was it?
Yeah, actually, 5 years ago, 2014.
Yeah. Where you won the Gold Award for. As myself and the current students at that time, we curated the show of that prize winning, which was in the crypt in the St Pancras, the church just near Euston Station. And as a fact, I'm sure you can show a little bit of that work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's always that, and continuing from that, I'm mostly going to focus on.
So I won't steal your thunder on that, but it was an astonishing piece of work. Andy is, what I find really intriguing with Andy is this combination of this incredible technical ability that you do a lot of your coding yourself, and we'll hear about that, but also a very, very careful aesthetic approach to the way that you visualize things on screen, but also physically. And that's going to be really intriguing to see some of that as well. I've particularly in the past been really impressed, and most recently, been particularly impressed with your installations, and most recently the piece you had at the Royal College in the playback of the 50 years of the Contemporary Art Society.
Computer Art
Society. Computer Art Society is a really good installation there. So there's a very careful attention to detail at all levels. So that's been really enjoyable from my point of view, kind of watching and seeing your work over the years since I first met you 5 years ago. So don't really say anymore. Over to you.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm sure people will jump in with questions and comments as we go along.
Actually, one thing is I actually haven't got anything about that like the piece I had in the CAS exhibition in here, but I could talk about that as well. So if that's something you want to bring up a little bit later. Remind me about that. Yes, I'm happy to talk about that. So yeah, nice to meet you. So yeah, I guess what I'm going to be talking about is my artwork, what's become sort of ongoing obsession for many years, which was like the roots of which go back many years. And then actually, full disclosure is actually I come from a maths background originally, and that's what I studied as an undergraduate. But I guess I was always interested in digital things in general. So I got involved in the filmmaking when I was an undergraduate and stuff like that, as well as, and I think most of my tutors thought I'd wasted far too much time going out with cameras and edit suites and things like that, and I should have been studying maths. But also the whole idea of, it's almost like maybe a mathematical view of how life works, or how life, what is it that life is based on? What is the material that life is made out of? So the sort of like dangerous thing that I sort of read many years ago when I was an undergraduate was there was a combination of things. But I was studying this area of maths that's called dynamical systems, which is basically the maths of things that feed back into themselves. So that's sort of the maths of chaos theory and things like that is part of dynamical systems. So it's the maths of things where you take some system and then you do something and you take that result and you feed it back into itself. And you take that result and feed it back in, and feed it back in, and feed it back in. And you tend to, you often end up with really complex, rich, unexpected, it's often called emergent sort of behavior. So it's almost like the maths of, whereas a lot of maths traditionally focuses on making things solvable, almost like, okay, here's something, but is there something we can do to simplify it, to make it a bit, make it nicely solvable? Almost dynamical systems is the opposite. It's the like, okay, well, what happens if you don't what's called linearize things that make things solvable? What behaviors happen? So the combination of that and then reading this book called On Growth and Form, which is a book that was written just over 100 years ago by a guy who's like a combination of being like this classicist philosopher, zoologist, and mathematician, Darcy Thompson, actually. Darcy Wentworth Thompson, if you're imagining like this Victorian gentleman with a ridiculously huge beard and things like that, you've just got it perfect. So he's actually also, I think, quite a likely guy, and he's actually one of the first professor level people really insisting that women had to be able to come along to his lectures and things like that, and really trying almost like bucking the mold of, Victorian society. So I actually think he's a really pretty cool guy as well. He wrote this book called On Growth and Form that was basically, what was then a radical idea, was saying almost like maths is relevant to biology. That, you look at the sorts of things you see in nature, they're grown forms, and therefore they've grown through this process which involves physics, it involves maths, it involves, there's the process, and the process of them growing is reflected in the final structure. Saying that effectively what he sort of basically said in his work was, these structures you see in trees and plants and animals, it's almost a illustration of all the forces and processes and all the intermediate stages it went through. It's not like, we built something by designing it and then building it from the outside down. You've got something that starts as a single cell and it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows. And you end up with certain types of structures, certain types of things, like seashell plants, all these sort of things. There's a commonality about it, and there's a sort of, and the whole process is relevant. So there were cheap paperback version of Growth and Form came out when I was an undergraduate. I thought, well, that looks interesting. And yeah, that was sort of almost like the thing that was lighting the blue touch paper. That, it's sort of the combination of that with the area of maths that I was studying, dynamical systems, which was almost thinking, he was, I guess, Darcy Thompson was mostly dealing with almost like that's what you call classical mechanics. And I was sort of thinking, like, actually, maybe dynamical systems would be a more modern mathematical way of looking at, modeling what Darcy Thompson was talking about. And also reading Alan Turing stuff. So Alan Turing actually is last year's became more and more focused on simulating biologically complex things. So when he wanted to be saying that, as we make computers, what can we do with them that we utterly couldn't do before. So we're saying, instead of, there's so much of the focus all and forever with computers has been taking things you can already do before, but just making it quicker and cheaper. The much more interesting thing, I think, hopefully reflected in my work, is we're saying, what are the things that you just couldn't even think about doing without having these devices that can compute, can do huge numbers of calculations? What can they do that's different from what a human can do with a piece of paper or just what your thought? What these enable us was like new possibilities, new things to actually try out. So the whole idea of maybe having really simple mathematical rules, but then a computer allows you, because it can do, but only if it can do millions and billions of calculations, can allow you to start to explore almost like levels of complexity and levels of almost like, you know, ask questions and then find and experiment with it and see what happens in a way that you just couldn't even think about doing without this, you know, this new technology. So those are probably like the big things that set me off down this road. After university, I got sort of semi-willingly, I guess, yeah, sucked into the computer graphics and, you know, the visual effects animation sort of industry. And I guess, you know, I learned a huge amount by working in those industries. And I guess I continued doing my own work on site. That's one thing I quite like about the industries. Lots of people involved in that sort of work are doing their own things also, you know, by the side. A lot of people will be, you know, sneaking in at the weekend and using the equipment that's there for their own things, or working together on their own projects, you know, with their, you know, so it's like you're on the film set during the week, and then it's like, you know, you find, oh, you're good at sound recording, you're good at editing. Should we get together at the weekend and do our own stuff? You know, so there's a whole culture, very strong culture of that, and showing each other's people's work and, you know, work within that. So I guess my sort of like, you know, obsession sideline, partly to keep myself sane, but obviously, you know, was almost like doing all the things that you're not allowed to do professionally when you do visual effects, but using the same techniques. But, you know, it's like when you're doing things professionally for, you know, for the director and they're paying you good money to do it, generally what you're having to do is things which are, you know, it's following their decisions, but it always generally has to be predictable, controllable. You know, they ask you for, now that's good, but can you change this? Can you do this? Can you do this? You know, it's all this sort of review and give you notes on what they want changed, and then you have to be able to make exactly those changes without making anything else go wrong. You know, so predictability and control is hugely key to professional visual effects and animation. So partly it was me going, you know what I think is much more fun and interesting is unpredictability, or the edge of control, edge of out of control, edge of instability, you know. And, you know, I want the computer to surprise me. I want it to do things which, you know, it's not just, I've crafted it and I know I can control it in any way I want. I want it to utterly surprise me. And, you know, that's what my own work alongside, it's often using the same sort of machinery, the same sort of programming techniques almost, and things like that. So I was programming things like, I mean, I guess the brain system was used in the Matrix film, or Matrix 2 and 3, that's one I sort of programmed. So it's had to, you know, to do, like, you know, huge amounts of, you know, detail and complexity, but in a way that we could then have lots of different artists working with and could, you know, direct it and control it and make it do things, you know, because the director's saying, can you make it do this? Can you make it do this? In some ways, having millions and millions of raindrops is not too dissimilar from what I was doing, but millions and millions of cells. So yes, I think that's good useful sort of the background where I came from. So many years, this was my almost like my sideline obsession projects, working alongside. I worked for about 20 years on, you know, TV and film work, and then gradually it just grew. Not literally grew. Mostly it's about growth, and it sort of grew as a project to the point where, and things like the Nobel Prize was probably one of the big things where, okay, maybe this is the time to start taking this seriously, more seriously. Well, they always took it seriously, but, you know, And the expression sabbatical is a great euphemism for throwing in the day job to do something completely crazy. So my wife agreed that, okay, let's do this as a sabbatical. Let's, there's some other things that meant that financially it wasn't the stupidest thing in the world to do. Basically, sort of 4 years ago, basically went essentially full time, into working on the artwork. Though I've also been doing some work part-time teaching. So I was tutor at the Bartlett, basically UCL's architecture school, for about 3 years. And then I've just, this last year, I moved from the Bartlett to Goldsmiths. I'm now just less than half time now, but I'm a lecturer over at Goldsmiths, which is only just compatible. It's almost like, and I'm learning a lot being there. I never went to art school. Actually, quite a nice way of going to art school is get them to pay you to go to art school. Basically, I'm now just down the road at Goldsmiths, though I get this term off completely free effectively, and then spring term I effectively work full time. It's sort of the way it sort of works, which seems to work quite nicely. So enough background setting the scene sort of waffle. Now let's show you some of the work. So most of my work focuses on this idea, it's like saying, well, you can, like Darcy Thompson's idea of growth as a process. What can be created through growth, form, structure, and also dynamics. Almost like the idea of not just growing necessarily still things, but almost like the process of transformation of shape that happens through growth. I think can be really interesting in its own right. And the sort of things you might see in nature if you film something like a time lapse. So you're speeding up growth like mad, and you see these things like rich movement and form things that happens. And then it's just almost experimenting with, it was like experimental, almost like what can you get? What sort of forms and structures happen? And also, I'm not interested in just trying to simulate biology. I'm going to sort of take inspiration from biology, and I think there's something very human about natural organic form, as far as we're obviously deeply, there's something that resonates deeply with us about rich and I think a sufficient level of complexity in organic form. We are tuned to respond, I think, to almost like extreme of almost like thinking something is like utterly sublime and utterly revolting. There's a sort of, I think those are both tend to be organic, at least in my mind, organic things, something of that nature that sort of makes how we have a reaction to. So I think there's a deep human response to this sort of thing as well. And it was the question of how different, if you set the rules of growth up really differently from nature, what would happen? Would it be utterly alien and unfamiliar and you don't have any response to it, or would it be deeply familiar, or I don't know. So it's almost like actively wanting to try it out and wanting to find out. That's often what I'm doing, is creating systems which are massively simplified, I guess, one of the big things compared with what really happens, or we believe happens in real biology that happens, in life that happens on this planet. But it's almost like, how different could the rules be, but what does it create? And I think it actually often makes things, I've been surprised by how familiar things are. But I'm not trying to make, I guess that's one big thing, I'm not trying to make something that looks like an oak tree, or looks like a particular coral, or looks like, I'm not trying to replicate anything specific. I'm much more interested in what does almost the material, this is like using this as like paint, what does this material naturally come out with, and what do I respond to? And I'm also, very much, as I'll get into this talk, show you how to work with this creatively. I sort of like, is this science? Is this art? I don't know. It's what I do because I'm obsessed with it. But I am more interested in my own reaction to these things. Something that I like that, and liking could mean, wow, that's so ugly, it's astonishing, I find that really interesting. There's something about that makes me go, I'm really interested in that. I'm interested in that rather than just like categorizing and typifying sort of things. There's my own aesthetic response is something I'm interested in, and how to work that into the process, how to make that something which is steering, guiding, but not controlling, I guess is one thing. So it's almost like it's very much influencing the sorts of things that I'm creating. I'm not just trying to set top something and then just let it randomly generate stuff. I'm interested in being deeply involved in the process, and what does that mean, me working with the computer? So, okay, enough waffle, let's start showing you some more things. So I'm going to start by showing you oops, two things. Is that going to play? That's right. Okay, great, cool, that's fine, play. So this is actually the video that John mentioned that actually won the Lumen Prize 5 years ago, called Cellular Forms. And it's basically a whole series of structures that start as like a ball of 42 cells, just accidentally sort of worked out as 42. They all start as the same ball of cells, and they're all basically, there's rules for cells growing. So it's rules for basically cells accumulate a certain amount of food, and then they split into two cells. And food can be created by they spontaneously generate a certain amount of food every frame, or it can be that light rays coming from outside and hit the cells, so that the cells that are most exposed on the outside get most light, and those are the cells that tend to most grow. So there's rules in the system that can control how much food each cell accumulates. And when a cell gets enough food, it then splits into two cells. And there's also rules about, well, when it splits into two cells, which direction do they split in? How do they split? And that can be influenced by things like how much tension there is in the surface. It's almost like there's sort of springs in the surface, and the direction of most tension could affect the direction it splits, or the curvature of the surface, or it could be just random. And then after it splits, that cell has to connect back up with the other cells around it. Well, how does it connect with the other cells around it? So there's all these sort of things, are things which there's all sorts of different decisions that could have been made, all of which could affect how it grows in different ways. And that's almost what I'm interested in, is that I don't know what it would change, make it grow in the direction of most tension, or make it grow in the direction of least tension. How is that going to make the structure grow after I've repeated this tens or in hundreds of thousands of times, and gone from just starting with a ball of 42 cells, where these all get to basically about 50 million cells by the end of these simulations. I mean, that's also a thing I'm interested in, is a certain level of degree, a certain level of intricacy. So that's one thing when I was working in visual effects, was always a thing where, visually, almost as a rule of thumb, you almost need to get to about 1 million or something, and then things start to become, as long as their structure becomes potentially rich, interesting structure. Whereas almost like lower than that, and things look just like molecules, almost like they're quite simple structures. But when you get to a level where almost your mind can't take the whole of it in, but has almost like you look really closely and there's different levels and levels of structure in there, but makes sense rather than just being random mess. There's a sort of like single threshold, about 1 million or so, and then it starts becoming organic rather than chemical, almost.
So you think that's something about our visual perception?
Yeah. I think it's some visual perception and how we respond to things. Getting to a point of complexity where it's multi-level. There's lots of different, which I think is also in painting, all sorts of things where it's getting to that level where there's layers to it. Certainly it's a rule of thumb I've had for many years, and it seems to work surprisingly well. Basically, at around 1 million units of particles, whatever, things seem to go from being relatively simple to relatively complex.
So I just got a question. So another example where you've got mathematical rules and complexity is obviously fractals, but they don't become sort of more organic in terms of form. They sort of retain this very sort of structured mathematical kind of form. What is it you think about your process that results in these more organic forms, or do you find that sometimes they don't go down the organic route and something kind of else sort of emerges from it?
When fractals are sort of like related to dynamical systems, things like, as I mentioned, stuff like that at the beginning. I think there's a big element of randomness, that most fractals are purely deterministic. They don't have any random element in them. They can. I mean, you can inject randomness into fractal generators. So a lot of the like software to generate things that looks like, you know, mountain landscapes with canyons and that often are based on fractal generators. But there was called stochastic fractals, which is just the posh maths word for saying random. Stochastic is random, right? So just adding randomness into the fractal system can make things a lot richer. I mean, there's one classic fractal that I did some previous work. I did some like variations on. It's called diffusion limited aggregation, which is probably one of the most classic stochastic fractals. It's actually based on random particles moving around and then gradually accumulating. So it's almost like food depositing underwater or something like that. Sticky bits of clay swimming around, floating around underwater and gradually accumulating. And that's a well-studied fractal, but it's a very interesting, rich random. It looks very coral-like. And actually, part of this work was almost coming from that, saying, well, that work seemed to produce an interesting, rich range of things, but they were always these sort of fern-come corals. What would be needed to make something which was even richer, more internal organ animal sort of like things? And I guess that this is somewhat more based on a system of cells growing. So I think it's the random elements being involved in it, I think is a big thing. And also this is fundamentally a growth system, you know, of cell growth. So, you know, that's where the rules of cell growth are pretty very different from biology, but it is a cell growth system. So that's one thing that probably makes it pushing in the direction of maybe being more biological.
So I'm familiar with this work from Max Cooper's album show Emergence. So how did that come about? Did he find you through the Lumen Prize, or you know, how did that relationship start?
That relationship started by us having a mutual friend in LA. Though he lives in London and I live in London, it was a friend of ours, both of us in LA, who basically just said, "Max, you really should meet Andy." Right. And so he put us both in contact with each other. And we go, yeah, and we seem to have a lot in common. I mean, it was really nice to be there. Yeah, we worked on quite a lot of things now over the years, and I just was working. He's done a recent show at the Barbican, commissioned by the Barbican, where they're doing some more graphics and things like that. And we almost always, it's just like he's going off and doing his own things. I'm doing off my own things, and we just got a similarity of ideas. It's never been, you know, him saying, "Hey, I want you to do this, and this." It's more like, well, I'm interested in this now. Well, I'm interested in this now. Well, maybe you could put this together. So it's been a really nice collaboration where we get excited by some geeky things.
Did you do something for the Barbican show? Because I went to that show.
Yeah, it was actually sort of almost like a slight variation on this. It was, but you were seeing the connections. So it was sort of like triangle grids of things which are growing, and it was like that.
Like in a blue colour.
It went from went into different colours, and there was like colours which were actually showing things like, you know, how much food each cell had and when the cells were growing. So all the colours were actually coming from the simulation. And then there's a bit at the end where Nick Cobby had a piece which is like drone footage over Mexico City, or looking down on these like, you know, circulatory systems of roads, things like that. And he used quite a lot of Jessica and my work to layer into his footage of Mexico City. So it's fun. It's fun concept.
It's an amazing show.
Yeah.
You say growing, but it stays the same size. Is that, are you zooming out, or are you just the way you write the code stop it doing that?
These ones I'm zooming out. So I've actually done both. There's some latest stuff, vase-like structures I'm created where I was changing the cell size, but for a different route, depending how I set the system up. But these ones, it's actually the cells will stay about the same size. And what I'm doing is I'm just actually quite like the camera sort of just reframes itself almost like over perfectly every frame. It gives sort of nervousness to it.
So how bigger will they be at the end than the beginning if you didn't?
It depends on the structure. It depends on, I was like, okay, so almost all these are 50 million cells by the end, but depends on how many cells are on the inside, or how much is it almost like a balloon which doesn't have much cells on the inside. Yes, so some of these might be just, a few tens of times bigger than they were to start with, and some might be hundreds, thousands of times bigger than but I just let the computer just run, they've just got a code which just reframes so it stays central of the frame, top and bottom, And some of those use slightly different algorithms, but
Sorry.
Yeah.
Is there any application of this in cancer?
It's a very good question.
Just in case it didn't come across on the audio recording, just say that a little bit louder.
I just said, is there any application of this to cancer research?
So I have had a few inquiries and conversations with people involved in cancer research, and I think the answer is no. But because what's important in that sort of thing is getting the model right, making it work, grow and not grow, or you can you're wanting to work out how to change things to stop the cancer growing, and you need to have a good model of really why cancer grows. So I've had quite a lot of conversations, still do, with people in life sciences and into what's called artificial life. And I'm much more on the artificial life, which is it's defined as being the study of life as it could be rather than the study of life as it is, which is the great excuse just to go and do anything. But rather than accurate modelling biology. There are people in life sciences, like I did a few things up in Dundee, where there's a life sciences institute as part of the University of Dundee, which actually was the University of Darcy Thompson used to be part of. So there's the Life Sciences Institute there is quite big, and they also do quite a lot of art-related things, which is quite cool. What I've generally found is often people are doing more fundamental science research rather than something as practical as cancer research, do get really interested in this, where it's almost like, that is really different from real biology, but yet makes things that are often remarkably similar, is, I think, really interesting for people who are more studying maybe the growth in general, or rather than specifically trying to cure cancer.
With the stuff on growth,
Yeah.
are you thinking about economic growth as well? Because I look at this and we talk about like endless growth, like we don't we just think that the economy is going to keep growing like 3%, 4% every year, and there's just like no correlation back to nature and kind of like. But
or having a limited resource.
Yeah. So when I look at this, you can kind of see there's a point where it's quite beautiful, and then there's a tipping point where it starts decaying, and so it's just kind of that idea back to the.
Not explicitly. I'm probably more from the. I think you could read some things like that into it, but that's not the things that excite me tend to be more purely organic, I guess. I think I do. There is there's actually another piece I'll put a bit later at the time, which is where almost everything seems to have rich, interesting structures almost in the midlife of growth. By the end, almost only one type of structure proliferating, actually became more simpler towards the end, I think there's an interesting aesthetic about that, almost the way it becomes richer and richer, and then the richness degrades much more than it does in some of these.
Okay.
But then another thing is trying, what would need to make it even stop that happening? Which I've got some ideas about. That's one of the things about this is almost every piece then gives you another 4 or 20 ideas, and what about now trying this? What about now trying that? That almost transition from, and maybe that it does degrade as it gets, it grows and grows and grows, and it grows too much. I'm aesthetically interested in it, but maybe not explicitly as a commentary on whether the capitalist system is about to eat itself.
but there's moments that you kind of like see that in there.
Yeah. Well, and the ugliness of some of the growth I really like. I mean, certainly that's what I really like. And so it's almost like beautifully ugly, I guess.
Yeah, like there's like points where you can kind of see it goes from like really beautiful to like getting quite ugly.
So yeah, that's something I'm definitely going for. I mean, also what you're seeing here are the success of some of the things that I thought were interesting enough to present. I've got hundreds of thousands of other things I tried which were either not quite as interesting, and so often I'm not sure why, or really just didn't work. I mean, actually, mostly if I set these systems off, it either sits there and does nothing, or it just explodes. You know, it's just like the forces are too big, and it just rapidly just explodes into just things flying around all over the place, and it's just it's you're seeing the things where it works here. That's also one thing I'm really interested in. Is almost this narrow line. It's almost like life exists. It's almost like I think there's the fragility of life. I think that's one thing that I get from this. It's actually these sort of living like structures you can do it very naturally, but you do have to tune it really carefully. It's almost like a little bit too much or a little bit too little, and you go from nothing happening to it exploding. So it's we're often right on these like tipping points between, actually one of my next slides about order and chaos. And life seems to exist in that sort of boundary zone. That's one thing I'm very interested in, and how to then creatively work with that, how to explore that space, how to find these things that happen at these sort of tipping points. So I think in some ways maybe that's a bit of a commentary, that it's the too much or too little, and it really doesn't work.
Alexis has put a lot of comments in here. Maybe it's actually worth you look. I'll send these to you later to think about. But it's typically referencing Taylor's question about any usefulness within cancer research or other areas. He says he suggests there's no application because these simulations do not have a relationship with their environment, because they're kind of isolated, independent things that are growing.
Yeah, but though I mean, somewhere in the previous work I did to this was actually in some ways very much about environmental rules, almost like a very simple system, and everything that made these interesting differences was essentially changing the environment that things are growing in. So that's like this fractal one. That's I'll switch to the next slide. Actually, that slide. So that slide's actually of a sort of fractal-like growth. But what I generally was doing to make it do more interesting than the straight obvious fractals was change the environmental rules and exploring what the effects of those would have. And that's something that's now coming into these more cellular-like growth systems as well. Actually, the vast structures and things that I've been physically fabricating, in some ways that's getting to changing the environmental rules again. So it's almost like how to steer this to make something that can be fabricated by a 3D printer. What I'm almost essentially doing is almost like changing the environment of its growth to steer it towards something which isn't guaranteed, but is more likely, has a good chance of being 3D printable. So actually, it's a really interesting question, and that relationship between a growth system and its environment, I think, is really interesting. The original cellular forms, actually, that comments were right. But what I almost didn't have at all in that, apart from light rays coming in, was an environment. They were almost, environment free.
Because he suggests here the growth is internally generated. An interesting work in this field is sort of inner growth was Agnes Arber, who was a plant biologist, I think. You mentioned that. I'll pass this on to you because there's some interesting comments that you make here. He just asked the question: has Andy tried parts of a growth from starting to communicate with other parts to generate differential structures that bear different forms rather than fractal-like forms?
Yes-ish, and it's a direction I'm more going in. I'll probably that segues very much into some of the things I'll show later in the talk. So that's very good questions. Yeah. So yeah, basically, so what a real core mathematics here I'm interested in is how do life emerge? The sort of systems that have this sort of rich complexity that almost like what is it that life uses to make these sorts of structures? And the other big thing is then having something that steers it, something that it's almost like you make the system is potentially rich, but it's almost really out of control. Nature, I think, does it through evolution, through survival of the fittest, natural selection, things like that. How you always need a way, something that provides a steering influence. And obviously, creative, I'm interested in, what is it involved for a human to be involved in that process as well? Involved in us steering, working with this. What is this sort of like medium like to work with? So here's a sort of quote from Stuart Kauffman, who's a sort of zoologist and philosopher who works with complex ideas to the complexity a lot, which I think just captures this idea of life as being something that's almost like this fragile boundary edge. They're saying the wonderful possibility to be held as a working hypothesis, bold but fragile, is that on many fronts, life evolves towards a regime that is poised between order and chaos. So it's almost this sort of system which don't do enough, and it just does boring, predictable things. Push it too far, it does chaos, which is basically effectively random behavior. It's just out of control. The system that can do both of those, what often will have is somewhere between the two, is the point where the rich, unexpected, and the idea that maybe that's one thing that life does again and again, is it's almost like steering the system to keep it at that boundary. Because if you have not enough of the behaviour, it's not enough for it to happen for life to happen too much, and it's out of control. So it almost naturally, by survival of the fittest, things like that, you naturally it's like steered towards being actively on this sort of fragile boundary. So a bit more detail about cellular form. So let's give you a bit of background of almost like algorithms going into it. If you want more detail, and I've got some papers online, go to my website and things like that, and there's like formulae and things like that and stuff. I don't give code out because my code base is just too big. Because mainly to get to these levels of complexity, I've got far more code than just the raw algorithm, mostly just to make it do it efficiently enough. It means that it's tens of thousands of lines of code. Right, so I'm happily sharing almost like the maths, the algorithms, and I've had a few other people who've actually implemented, the basic same algorithms and experimented with it themselves. So I'm happy to talk to people about that and stuff. So the basic idea of the system is that it's for these cellular growth systems, these cellular forms and the sort of things that have come from it, is that it's essentially a sheet of cells, almost like a sheet of almost like rubber-like sort of sheet of cells, or cells that are linked together with lots of springs. So we've got a sort of sheet where the cells are the sort of like these vertices of almost like all these triangles, a sheet of triangles, and the cells are almost like at the corners, and then there's links between the triangles, which are the corners, which are where say this cell is directly connected with this cell, so they can sort of exert forces on each other. And then what we have is things like rules for cell division. So things like when a cell accumulates enough food, we select it to be split, and there's rules for how that happens. So what we do is after a cell's been sort of selected, this cell in the centre to be split. Can that come through at all? Okay, cool. So we select a cell, and then we have to choose two of the links as being almost like where the split happens. So this cell's be split. We use certain rules to then say these are the two edges that are going to be the plane of cleavage, where the split happens. Then we break all the links along to one side of that edge, those edges, create a new cell, move the cells a little bit apart from each other so that the parent and the daughter cell, are a little, aren't right on top of each other, and then we reconnect the daughter cell back up into the grid. So what we end up with is a new cell has been created and it's been reconnected. We've still now got a surface of triangles. So it's in 3D space. They can move three-dimensionally, but it's basically like a sheet of cells that I'm using. And then there's just quite sort of mathematically, physically, like very simple rules. So basically, I have like spring forces between the cells, so that the cells try to maintain a constant distance apart from each other. And if they get close to that distance, they push each other apart. If they're further from that distance, they pull them towards each other. It's almost like really simple, what's called Hooke's law of springs. Then there's sort of like active bulging force. So if the cells are squished towards each other, what happens is that this sheet tries to almost actively bend. Right, so it's almost like it's an area of the sheet that's being squeezed in compression. What it tries to do is it tries to move. If it's an impression, it sort of works out where would the cell have to move in what's called the normal to the surface. I don't know how much 3D graphics stuff you do here, but basically it's sort of how far would it have to move almost like out of the surface to get to the point where it wouldn't be being squished anymore. Right, so it's basically a tendency for, if you squeeze an area of the sheet together, for the cells to bulge outwards actively. Then there's a thing almost like doing the opposite. So it's saying that a cell also has a tendency to almost like move towards the average of the cells that are around it. Which almost tends to flatten things out. So if you've got like a ridge or something that's sticking out, this tends to pull the cell back towards being sort of flat against its neighbours. And that's the sort of thing I like almost doing this in systems, sort of having things which are pulling against each other. So it's almost like you see the bulge influence almost pulls in the opposite direction to the this planar smoothing sort of influence. And these can have different strengths. So like in one system, you might set it up where there's a really strong bulge influence and a really weak planar influence. And so in that system, the cells may be likely to fold like mad, lots of ridges. Whereas another one, if the planar influence is much stronger, you might have something that's much more like a wobbly bubble sort of thing. So again, it's sort of things where I like the idea of these things almost like fighting against each other. Maybe that's sort of like, competition between them is going to make interesting things happen. And there's so much as ingredients to put in there to then sort of see what happens.
So, talking about interesting things happen, what occurred to me was that, have you come across anywhere where perhaps the cells, as a result of the different pressures, have been expelled from the structure or been destroyed from the structure?
So, no, well, in the basic system here, links never get broken. Well, I guess the maths numbers might get so big that the computer runs out, can't represent numbers that big.
Might be one of the surprises.
But one thing when I'm running the simulation, quite a lot of the simulations just fail. But the numbers just get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's almost these systems exploding. And what I do is then I've got some tests saying like if the average link distance between cells goes up, it's usually about 1 unit. If it's going more than I think about 1,000 units, something's gone horribly wrong. You've got a system that's just out of control. So I do things that's like look for things during the simulation. Has the distance between cells got ridiculously huge? In which case something's gone wrong, kill it. No point in trying it anymore. It never gets to the point that in this system, it never gets to the point where a cell can pull away from the structure. They will always be linked. But part of that means that then if they go too far away, they start bouncing around like mad, and it's never going to work. It's just a mess.
Do you do like batch simulations? So would you say like, I don't know, play with this variable, leave that running overnight, come back, see what's happened, or are you literally sort of tweaking them kind of individually, and how does it work?
I get time, I'm going to get right into that in a big way.
Okay.
But the answer is I'm running hundreds or thousands of simulations, and I'm using evolutionary and machine learning techniques to have to help explore the space of possibilities, and partly also to really navigate it towards those sort of boundaries and things like that. I started by just tweaking numbers by hand, and it just doesn't work. It's frustrating. It's almost like, how do I work with this system? It's like there's too many control. I've got no idea how to. I think this can do some really rich, interesting things. How can I find it? And then I got it wasn't what I was intending to do, but I ended up going down to these parallel things, writing simulations, then writing, which has always made more my research area now. It's becoming more and more how to find the
Yeah,
parameters.
I mean, that was my sort of initial reaction, was
Yeah.
like, there are so many variables that you find it almost overwhelming as even where you start to tweak them.
Oh, yes. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
But then
Yeah.
that's your point at the very beginning.
Yeah.
What can this machine do,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
you can't do on a piece of paper with a pencil?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's exploring that, isn't it?
Yeah, and to my eyes, on two levels, or that, or even more than two, but two particular levels. There's both the computer allows me to write these simulations that I can run for millions of cells and things like that, and also techniques like evolutionary algorithms and machine learning maybe can help allow me to explore that space of possibilities in ways that I couldn't otherwise, because there are too many parameters. I could try just a few things out, but I've got no idea how to explore this space. So that's becoming more and more. I've got this sort of software called Species Explorer, which is, what I've been developing over about 10 years now, and I'm actually actively doing a lot more work on it right now. Which is, it feels almost like a collaborator now. It's sort of like, it's everything in the cellular systems, all the results I show you are all generated using Species Explorer to choose the parameters. I'm not hand tweaking parameters anymore.
So when it does something really interesting, it takes you a while to realise why it's done something interesting, or do you understand why it's done something interesting, or is it getting so complicated you don't really?
Sometimes you do, sometimes you see things that's unexpected, but now I see that makes sense. And sometimes it's just like, whoa, that's cool. No idea why it did that, but it did it. Okay, well, maybe let's explore it. Let's do more of it. And it might take a while. Maybe then after a few months, I might, oh yeah, of course, that's what's going on. But sometimes it just, it's part of it cool to say it. Yeah.
A couple of things being mentioned here. Pat mentions an American artist called Tony Orico, who does these, I'll show you some pictures later, does these incredible drawings, two hands at the same time, kind of brain drawing. Yeah. But it's about, it kind of visually has a resonance with the first work. That's why, but also something about reach, which is very interesting. But also he mentions Blossfeld, Karl Blossfeld, who's a German photographer who, again, has images which resonated with your things. Alexis mentions Conway's Game of Life, the mathematician, which I'm sure you're very familiar with.
He was one of my lecturers back at university, so yeah. I have met John Conway.
But then Alexis does ask, have you tried two cell walls interacting with one another? So rather than just within themselves, I guess he's thinking, what happens? Or is that actually what's going on inside each one anyway?
Well, they do react with each other. To more than one separately grown structure. Yes, I have done a bit. I won't actually be showing any of that, but yeah, I do. I have done a bit of that. Mostly they're one structure, and all the cells interact with each other. So so basically, this planar forces, and actually that leads me to this. Then the final general ingredient I've got in here is it's a bit like, so this is like cells interacting with each other, other than the cells they're directly linked to. So one thing I realized was, this, if you just let the cell, I'll just write this. Basically, it's a bit like static electricity. So the idea is that cells slightly repel the other cells around them in space, just the cells that happen to be nearby. It's not the cells that are linked by these direct edges, but just like, so the idea is that if the structure starts folding over, cells which happen to be nearby in space will sort of push each other apart a little bit, at least have a bit of influence on each other. So the idea of this is just meant to be a really simple way to almost like having a little bit of repulsion between cells. Cells that happen to end up close to each other, push each other apart a little bit. I found without that, what you would generally have was almost all the structures would just end up with this complete random mess. But by putting in this little bit of almost like static electricity into the system, you would end up with lots of structures which had much more sense. So this is exactly the same parameters on the left and right hand side, but where one side, the first one has the static electricity in there, the second one doesn't. And you see one ends up, I think, being really interesting structures, and the other one is just utter mess.
Are cells polarized in the natural world?
Some cells do have almost like electrical activity, and there's actually I think we ended up agreeing that it probably wasn't really what was going on, but there's a person who's doing research into what's called granular sludge, who got in contact a couple of years ago, which is with these sort of bacterial colonies that are used for one big use is sewage, removing all sorts of different things from water and things like that. It's very efficient sewage cleanup systems. And I got an email saying, did you know that some of your things look like granular sludge? And it's like, okay, I can take this as an insult, or I can take this as being interesting. And it was like, and then she started showing me some of the pictures, microscopy pictures of granular sludge granules, and some of them do look really like this. And it got to the point, eventually we ended up doing a paper together for, there is apparently an annual conference on granular sludge. So we went to, I got a paid trip to Delft, to the TU Delft, to present a paper with Amy, who's this researcher at Delft, for the annual granular sludge conference, which, as we put it, as being, they actually started with just saying, like, there was always a bit of fluff for the conference. It's just like, there's the serious research. You know what? There's always that stage. So the thing that you take away from this is that you can create things that look like granular sludge. Then if you make it a painting and put it up on a wall, people will call it art. That's the only thing you take away from it. That's great. So
I think that should be the top of your CV.
Yeah.
Paper presented at the granular
annual conference of granular sludge. Yeah, I don't know, it was fun, that one. So, actually,
Whose question was it?
I don't know. Something.
I can't remember. But there's another point here. This sort of.
It was about polarized cells.
So one thing that Amy said was that they are finding that it's almost like, generally tend to be, negatively charged. I think the general often assigned these surfaces of granular sludge often do have electrical charges.
Yeah.
So she was saying maybe this is the same thing happening, and I was going, like, probably isn't. And she proposed it at the conference, and unfortunately some of the other people at the conference are going, nah, that's rubbish. So yeah, there's a bit of a stat on that.
Just a comment here, the sort of growth reminiscent of growth hormone control, and also ecological pattern forming in competitive environments.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I'm looking at more and more is the idea of because of regulatory systems. It's almost like the whole question of how to what extra ingredients to add. My approach tends to be always trying to add only a very small number of extra ingredients and see what happens. But the idea of is a level of regulation and competition between cells the key to making them even more richer structures. That's definitely something I'm actually interested in.
And I know earlier you said you weren't interested in kind of like the economic things, but Betty's just popped out. This is back in it.
Yeah.
Just picking up what Betty said before about economy. That's a significant area as well. Is like the regulation and yet the kind of the freedom of the market.
Yeah.
But all the evidence is that you can't have an economy which just has a free market. It just doesn't work. You have to regulate it to get that balance. So again, it's kind of sitting on this
regulatory system
between chaos and order.
Absolutely. Actually, I think that's a very, very, very salient point. Is there is maybe something that's almost anti-free markets in this. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but that sort of thing there. The interesting, rich, potentially beneficial in some sense behaviour always needs something to steer it. That's definitely something that comes out from what I do. It's like if I just let this go freely, it makes really boring rubbish. It doesn't work. So I'm not going to go into software in detail, but basically all this pretty much is all my own code in C++ and what's called CUDA. If I was rewriting this again now, I probably would use open frameworks as a framework for it, basically to allow free use of C++, but within something that allows you to at least see the results more directly on screen and things like that. This is something that shows some stuff running live. So this is like, you see the triangle of grids of cells, and this was one early test where I was making some areas grow more than others using what's called reaction diffusion. So the red areas are the areas of really active cell growth. And you can sort of see those areas grow more, and the green areas are growing less, and then new red areas appear, and you get these sort of like kind of tendril-like sort of structures being sort of grown. Yeah, I'm using CUDA, which is basically an extension to C++ to make use of the graphics cards, so that I can run the simulations using the ridiculous number of processing on graphics cards. What I'll say is, CUDA is great if you need a ridiculous amount of power for doing things like that. It's also probably the last thing to use unless you really, really need it. It's like, it makes programming more difficult. But if you really do need, what I would normally do is write something, say in Python or C++ first, and then if I find something really needs just running far, far too slow, then maybe look at writing it to use what's called CUDA, and there's another thing called OpenCL, which is another similar thing that allows you to write program code that runs on the so it's code that just runs normal maths functions and things like that. That happens to run on the graphics processor rather than the main CPU, because those are typically 50 to 100 times faster than what's going on the CPU. But so I do far too much code in CUDA. It's basically
because you're so invested in that.
Yeah.
It's not worth the time of reimagining that completely in open frameworks.
Well, no, I would do it with CUDA with open frameworks.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I mean, with open frameworks, you can write stuff to users with OpenCL, compute shaders. Actually, compute shaders are actually a new thing, which are new compared to when I started writing this. Didn't exist when I first started this. Compute shaders are another way of writing code, particularly for graphics, that uses the graphics card rather than the main thing. So compute shader you can write straight without adding anything to open frameworks. Open frameworks already comes with a plugin you can download for doing OpenCL with open frameworks, and you could link CUDA in yourself. Yeah, so it's but yeah, that's far too geeky. Right. And these are the sorts of results we're getting. These are good results. It's sort of things which are, almost like, folded, maybe almost slightly internal organ-like structures. Maybe things a bit like, reptile skin. And I guess one thing I like to point out just technically on these is that all these things are growing just with only the cells ever affecting anything in just a tiny little local area around them. There's no big global forces. I haven't painted any texture maps or got big global forces happening, but yet you often end up with these big, interesting structures. And often it's things that maybe happen really early in almost like the embryo growth becomes really big structures later in the growth, and things like that, which I think has a sort of interesting sort of sides to it. Almost like how does something that's only local rules end up with something that's such big, large scale sort of behaviour. Something maybe it's more sort of coral-like, maybe sort of shark skin under an electron microscope. I guess one thing also here is that almost everything I'm finding, I've actually been surprised how familiar. It doesn't seem to ever almost come up with the utterly crazy 1970s sort of sci-fi art, that it's maybe there's an alien familiarity about it, but I'm almost surprised how familiar. Or maybe more things maybe to look like a combination of 2 or 3 other things, but it almost never seems to produce anything which is like, I've utterly never seen anything in, or it doesn't trigger feelings of being similar to something you've seen in nature or nature's nature. In some ways, I think this is probably about the least living organism-like thing I've found that it ever produced, but still has structure, rather than being just like a random mess. But even that, when I show to people, and they go, oh, but it does look like, you look at insect mandibles under an electron microscope, and it looks a bit like that. Or it looks a bit, maybe it's more geological. Like you look at like volcanic rock underwater, and it often makes these sort of interesting shaped fissures and things like that in it. So there's a sort of maybe geological come organicness about it, but that's probably about the least biological sort of thing I found from the system. But even that, I think, is like interesting and got reminiscences. So then I looked at almost like changes and slight modifications to the system. What happens if you add this? What happens if you add this? So this was almost like the next thing I did, which was actually starting to be almost like a slight environmental change. So it's basically saying the previous things generally were, food was made by light rays that came from all directions. What happens if the light rays only come from one direction, or from a small range of directions? And what you start getting is much more sort of plant-like and sometimes fungal-like sort of structures. That everything tends to be within that sort of realm, less sort of animal internal organ-like sort of structures. They all tend to be. Another one was, okay, well, all those previous ones, all the cells have the same properties as all the other cells. And effectively, they're structured with only one cell type. But what happens if we have two different cell types? So we have cells, and what I just did was a thing where it was like choose parameters for two different cell behaviors, and then all the cells can be anywhere between those. There's one extreme, and there's the second extreme of cell behavior, and then every cell is somewhere in the spectrum between, what's extreme A and extreme B. And again, I was really surprised actually in these ones, so I'll show a video on this, but basically, to be honest, like here, the green is showing like one cell type. Greenness is whether it's one cell type, and blueness is whether it's another cell type. And you get these, surprisingly, it was like embryos, small sea creature, protozoa, almost like things which look like multicellular life, really quite complex multicellular life, even though there are just two different cells in there. It's almost like this smallest, crazily unbiological baby step to, and all things that look deeply embryonic. So actually, I've got a video just to play. Okay. You play? So these are, and also all the movement, everything in this all just comes purely from the simulation. So there's like all twitches and bulges and tearing around. Might have some sound on this, isn't it?
Possibly. The TV controls are just beyond you.
All right.
Just turn the volume up.
You're right.
This is on HDMI, it might be that
It's not doing a lot, is it?
No,
because you've got HDMI, has it sent your audio by the HDMI?
Probably. Don't worry, there's some Max Cooper sound. This is one of the videos. I just did this as this, and then Max gave me like a reworking of one of his tracks for an exhibition that I had. Actually, it was an artificial life conference. So they gave me this actually really nice room. It's this two-story high room with high definition projectors on each walls.
Wow.
So we had these, like one of these on each of the walls, and they had a nice surround sound system, and Max remixed one of his tracks with all sorts of separate elements so that we could then use them within the surround sound system.
Amazing.
And then they made this into a video for his tracks.
Oh, yeah.
The original mix and track.
Scratch my back,
So yeah,
that's yours.
exactly, that's which is what we've done, which is cool. Just hear it very clear.
Yeah. Jellyfish.
Yeah.
Christine, there's a bigger question that I'm going to hold off a little bit, just for you to carry on a little bit more, because it's a bigger question I was asking. But are these structures a single cell thick?
They're all still just a sheet of cells. Yeah, it's a sheet of cells with just, I think that's self-propulsion between the cells, which tends to make it not totally collapse. But yeah, these are all sheets of cells rather than volumes of cells. But in 3D space, so the sheet can move around and twist and bend in 3D space. But
It's a sheet.
It's a sheet, yeah. which actually was quite not interesting. I sort of like, that's one of the things with a few life scientists. I said, one thing about my system that's complete rubbish is it's just a sheet of cells. And there's other way going, you know what? That's what biology actually generally does, is most things grow as sheets originally to start with, and then the sheet then grows structure inside. It's actually saying that there's remarkable number of times it's not just a volume that grows, it's actually a sheet that grows and then volume extends from the sheet. It's like, okay. I mean, part of that was that, I did write some, my system can be adapted to be a volume structure, or tetrahedral structure. It doesn't seem to produce as interesting shapes, at least I haven't found out how to do it. And maybe that's one thing that real biology is doing sheets. Maybe that's why, maybe there's a natural thing the material naturally allows you to create a more interesting range of complex structure by being essentially a sheet than by being a volume.
So is it possible to make, the question here is it possible to make a solid cell structures, or is that just too much computing power and that's why the sheets make more sense?
So my code, I mean, it's almost like it's object oriented with quite a lot of layers. So it's more like particles and then particle links, which particles have links between each other, and those links can be in a, and then I have what we have final links, and I call particle sheets, and then elastic sheets. I could have differentiated it off to be volumetric structures, so I could reuse most of that code to be a volumetric structure, and I have done some experiments, and it didn't seem to be being interesting. I mean, tetrahedral connections are quite a standard sort of pattern of connecting things up in volumes, so it's lots of little pyramids rather than lots of little triangles.
As Alexis is mentioning, he and his partner, who is watching as well, she graduated from the course last year, both have biological background as well, so biologists. But exactly that, biology does work in sheets often.
Yeah, seems to be spread. It's quite. But actually, that might be one of the things that's potentially a bit more different with cancer. Cancer maybe is more a volumetric, though I'm not enough of an expert on that. But certainly, there's only one feedback I got from the genuine life science, particularly more fundamental science biologists, with them going, no, sheets are great. Sheets give you rich structure. So yeah, so basically it's like another sort of actually another sort of video. This is actually another one, is the Max Cooper collaboration project. So this is quite a fun one, which is that in Karlsruhe in Germany, they have this projection mapping festival every year on the Baroque castle. It's like in the centre of Karlsruhe. They basically get a lot of, so they basically got 12 cinema quality digital projectors and lots of big sound system, and it's basically free. I think you're expected to buy lots of German beer and you sort of turn up in the park and then just watching projections. They commission a number of new works every year to go on it. So this was a collaboration actually with Zaha Hadid's what commissioned it originally, and then they invited a guy from Disney Research who does crowd simulations and myself to collaboration with the project, and I suggested Max as being Max Cooper as potentially become involved on the music side. So it's like the four of us together working together as a sort of collaboration to do a bit of crazy projection mapping, which it's quite fun. It's a 300-meter wide projection screen, effectively. 29 meters high, 300-meter wide. Sort of, so this is actual filming off the actual, genuine projection map footage. That's the stuff from Zaha's, this stuff from Disney Research, the crowds and things. Was that in the barbecue show? It looks quite similar. No, it was similar. So my stuff. Yeah, my stuff was similar-ish to this, but with lots of links and. No, I mean the one with the people walking at the beginning. No. No. Okay. I know it was. Different person. Yeah, it was here from a researcher at Disney Research. So yeah, that's quite fun. So now, what are we doing for time? We're waffling quite a lot. Yeah. very relevant waffling. So this is then talking about the even more into physical fabrication. So one thing was, okay, could we make some of these actually into sculptures? Actually, I mentioned how you affect things differently by materializing them differently. And also this is partly when I was working at the Bartlett, which is this, the UCL's architecture school. So they've got some robotic fabrication machinery. It's effectively like ridiculously big 3D printers, effectively. And so the idea was, could we use these growth systems to generate things which might potentially could be fabricated and maybe could be used as columns or supports for tables or things like that. So what we decided to do was to create a slight variation on the system where we're influencing the growth in different places. This more was a bit like environmental rules. So the main change in this was, okay, we wanted things to be generally column vases. So let's start with a tube of cells. So it's sort of tubular. And the cells at the top and cells at the bottom are constrained to stay in planes, so that you're it's almost like a tube of cells stretched between two planes. And then things can affect how the rates of how cells grow differently in different places. So this is almost like environmental rules changing the growth to influence it, to steer it. So firstly, to be a bit vase-like, maybe that the height of the cell in the system, so whether the distance along the vertical axis could affect the growth rate. So again, it's just I'm not saying make it twice as fast if it's higher up. I'm just saying there is a rate at the top, there is a rate at the bottom. Those are parameters of the system, and I've got no ideas what values might work, but they're just values that we can play with. So the how close to the top or the bottom in the structure is can affect the rate of cell growth. Also, we potentially want to stop things growing too far outwards. We want to sort of limit the cell to not grow too much. So as the distance away from the central axis can also affect cell growth. So basically, as things grow out further and further and further, potentially slow down the growth and you don't end up growing too far. And then the third thing was a thing which is more directly to do with 3D printing, saying that in order to avoid having to print lots of support structure, what we want to do is try to create forms which could be naturally printed without creating lots of support structure. The main thing that you need support structure for is when you've got overhangs, right? So it's basically saying, you all do a bit of 3D printing here, don't you? So that's it. So you need something in the layer below, nearby-ish, for each layer, for not to, to have some support. So if the structure itself is limited within certain overhangs, that hopefully will make a structure which is naturally 3D printable. Now, what we did, we didn't try to make it a strict constraint. We just said that, again, the overhang angle can affect the growth rate. So the idea was that if you get to more and more an overhang, that potentially could slow down the growth rate, and maybe that's a natural way to not guarantee that every single structure will be 3D printable, which what we're thinking was that's probably going to, that might make the structures too restricted. But there's a tendency, maybe what it means is there's some places in the space of possibilities, things it will do, which maybe are naturally going to be 3D printable. It's sort of like it's an influence that steers it in that way. Like it's like softer pushing. So I guess in my tendency is always to try to influence rather than control. So put that together, and yeah, it sort of surprised me. I guess I always ask for surprise, but this surprised me in why I wasn't initially intending surprise-wise, I guess, was it started making these utterly un-3D printable, crazy, but I really like, often these filigree tendrils. And I can honestly say, I did not program it to deliberately do this, which is what I like about it. Is that, I know people who spend lots of time trying to write algorithms to do natural branching and tree-like behavior and things like that. And this is almost just saying, I've got this growth system, it's almost like a rich enough material, and almost bugs in the code can naturally make it grow tendrils and almost like there's like cellular protuberances and things like that, which are, I was trying to make something 3D printable. This utterly isn't, or at least not with a mobile Ultimaker at home. You know, it's just like you couldn't print this in an Ultimaker. So this, and I sort of looked at these, and I basically worked out what the bugs were. I mean, in some ways, this is largely it was me trying to be, firstly, trying to be too clever. I guess two things. The first was just a straight bug, which was in this system, because it's almost like between two sheets, one thing I'm needing to do is reduce the cell size as it grows, right? Because the sheets are, I'm keeping the sheets this fixed distance apart from each other. It's a bit like that question, is the thing getting bigger or not getting bigger? The first cellular forms are doing bigger and bigger and bigger. These ones aren't. They're sort of, it's always the same distance between the top and bottom, but the cells are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Except I forgot to put that line of code into the code that what the light rays we're using. So as far as the light rays coming and hitting the cells are concerned, the cells were all still really big and inflated, which means that the cell that sticks out slightly further than its neighbour gets all the light rays. Because imagine if all the cells were like inflated like a big balloon, a cell that sticks out slightly further than its neighbour almost like obscures its neighbour, right? So basically, it's almost what you're seeing with these tips with the bright glowing. Actually, the orange, yellow one on the right, that's showing how many light rays are hitting each cell. So it almost like showed me, it's like, oh, wait a moment, only the cells at the tips are getting all the light rays. Ah, bug in the code, you know. So the other thing was me trying to be a bit too clever, which was what I did, thinking like, oh, cool idea, was let's change the growth rates by changing the rate of time in different bits of the structure. I think that's one thing I can change. Cool idea. It's a bit like general relativity and things like that. Hey, isn't that cool? And you know, it's sort of like slow down the rate of growth and everything, you know, automatically just by changing the rate of time. What I was also doing was changing the physics, so that all the forces between cells were getting slowed down as well. So effectively, what I was saying is there's a rule that if you got beyond certain overhangs, the rate of growth slowed down, but also the forces between the cells all slowed down, so things became fixed. So basically, between those two, that bug in the code and me trying to be a bit too clever for my own good, what I'd ended up with is a natural rule to make these crazy tendrils. But they look cool. So this is so one nice about the artwork is that what I made these into is sort of like a second series, so that I'm generally showing these as almost like stereoscopic installations, so that it's like there's two screens and two mirrors. And the idea is they exist three-dimensionally, but as virtual three-dimensional sort of forms, and you sort of you see them growing. They're two computer monitors, they're computer hidden inside the structure.
And I've seen that one.
Mm-hmm.
Was it at the cello factory?
No, I had the neuron piece, which is the thing that, you know, John mentioned. Is also in the Computer Art Society exhibition.
Yes,
is it
the Art Society exhibition?
that was
yeah.
more neuron, neuron messages going on inside. The similar,
similar structure, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's worth just highlighting in the middle there, because I'm not sure. Yeah, it kind of comes across on the video. You can see there's lenses. There's like a place for you to go and put your eyes.
Actually, there are no lenses in there.
They're not lenses.
They're just holes.
It has that feel, doesn't it?
It's actually just saying, place your eyes here to get the stereo view. And I quite like the idea. It's a triptych. It almost looks like a triptych, but it isn't a triptych. It's actually two images and two mirrors. It almost looks a bit like a triptych. Yeah, I like that. I don't like. So there's something that'd be interesting as you walk around the gallery space. But then if you put your eyes in the right place, then suddenly it's a three-dimensional thing. So then also this thing, fix the bugs. So these are the sort of bars-like forms that I'm getting by, which hopefully are, you know, are interesting aesthetic. Have also structurally, you know, some of these ridges and things like that. Maybe they could be really thin surfaces, but potentially be quite strong. So I've actually sort of been making these into, so these are 3D printed just on an Ultimaker, into actual sort of like, you know, sort of vase-like structures. And that's from an exhibition at Goldsmiths, and that was that was previous year at the V&A. So they gave me a little exhibition space where actually all these, apart from one at the end was actually fabricated by a commercial company, but all these are just Ultimaker sort of 3D printed.
I remember you said that these were taking a long time to print.
Yeah,
churning through hours and hours and hours.
Yeah,
and yet you have in your loft or something, and it's kind of like just churning away. So.
Yeah, basically, as well, I've got my own Ultimaker. I can just leave it going. I mean, The smaller, these was almost more like developmental series. There was like these ones. These take about 1 or 2 days each to print. These take about a week or so. There's 2 pieces. There's maybe about 5 or 6 days to print. This was actually probably the quickest print of the all. I think that probably took an hour or 2, but that was because it was a commercial company that used it in the Materialise, this Belgian company. It's called Selective Laser Sintering, which actually potentially could do something with much bigger overhangs, things like that.
Because sintering is where it comes out of the liquid.
This is actually out of a powder, but yeah, it's about like a powder of polyamide-based nylon, and it laser solidifies bits of the powder. So it's another fine layer of powder. Yeah, exactly. It's a layer of powder, laser melts the bright bits. Layer of powder, laser melts the bright bit, and the unfused powder supports all the other bits, so you can actually print things with really big overhangs. But yeah. What actually they couldn't do was print the whole structure in one because their software couldn't cope with my data.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I broke their data pipeline.
I mean, that's something I was asking, because the Ultimaker actually print anywhere near the resolution that you created the structures at, because they were so complex. Was it ended up being sort of almost a proxy for the digital 3D file?
What I was generally doing was the data files for these are about 10 million cells rather than about 100 million, which is what I could run. I could run the simulation about 100 million, but that was getting way detail which was utterly unresolvable on the Ultimaker. About 10 million, 5 to 10 million cells seemed to be the level where I was still getting relevant detail with the Ultimaker. That's all part of learning. It's fine. It's like, okay, let's try it out. Well, that looks like a just melted. It looked really nice on the computer screen. It just looks like melted rubbish on the Ultimaker. What is the level that looks interesting? So yeah, that seemed to be the threshold that I generally sort of hit with these. So it's still at the medium level. I think it's still. I should have brought one of these along. I think it's still got a level of looks surprisingly organic detail with it, but yeah, with the Ultimaker was capable of doing that.
So you didn't have to fix. I mean, often if you sort of let's say design something or scan it, you find that there isn't a connection, and then that causes the printer to go, oops, I don't know what to do next. I don't know where to go next. But I suppose with your algorithms, because you're always making sure it's good, you don't get that kind of problem.
To be honest, it was part more that I had to write a lot of code. Actually, some of these were printed and processed in different ways. I actually had to write a lot of code to turn my simulation data into 3D printable data. And yeah, I could talk for 2 hours just about that. Probably there was a lot of different things I did, and sometimes it depended on the structure that different techniques would work on. So I learnt a huge amount, which is fun, which is good. You know, it's almost like learning what this can do and can't do. So yeah, but I couldn't just take my raw data and print it. I mean, in general, essentially what I needed to do was turn things into essentially what I was generally doing, main technique I was using was almost like carving them out of lots of volume cells, voxels. So I'm actually almost like carving rays, actually using my same code, very my same code I'm using for my light rays and my simulations to carve the structure out of almost like a block.
So you actually sculpting.
Yeah.
So you created the sculpture.
Yeah.
And then a program, sort of like a manufacturing. So that you take solid block.
Yeah. And it's sort of almost saying all sorts of different directions. So it's sort of saying, actually what I want to do is to make this support itself, leave solid detail in there where you can't see it. So it's almost like look at all the directions you can see and carve inwards and leave what you can't see.
And that also just reduce on the print time as well.
Yeah, so you're not printing all sorts of detail on the inside that's never going to be seen. I mean, I have printed some that way as well. It's quite fun, just seeing the structure, which then gets hidden, which is maybe quite interesting.
But they're not solid inside.
They're not. These are generally not solid, but a lot of them have. There is they're semi-solid. They're sort of like, maybe it's like, open interior, but the walls maybe start having some sort of like more solid areas based on literally what you can see from the inside. So if you went in with a dentist mirror, and looked into my things, you'd find probably on the inside lots of stuff in there which is hidden detail that just it's almost sort of places.
So in a way, it's sort of similar to like a video compression technique. You can't see that. There's nothing moving there. Therefore, we'll just take it away.
Or leave that so that can become some stuff that helps the structure.
It has a practical use.
I mean, there are some that I've done just as the actual original mesh, and then just done a vase like printing. But most of these needed to be processed in other ways. And then basically then turn that volume data into a STL file and put into a conventional slicer.
So, on the animations you were showing us, the simulations, or do you select certain simulations and then have the lighting effects on, or do they all have that lighting effect on? You see what I mean?
All the colouring, all the light, all of the stuff in their simulations it's all data from simulation. I mean, the light, the effects are generally things like cells being shown in different colours by being, one cell type or another cell type, or the age of cells. So that cells flash white when they're born and then gradually become darker and darker and darker. Or the more food the cell has, the greener it is. Or when a light ray hits a cell, it glows a bit orange. And lots and lots of light rays, it glows bright yellow. So that all the lighting effect things in analog animations. I mean, I've chosen colours and toned them to make what I think looks aesthetic. But it's all data from simulation.
But when you've got one that you like, that you think work, you want that to be shown, you do a lot more work on it to turn it into animation to shown. You see what I mean?
Not much work. I mean, there's generally just decide how long it should be. It's like, is this going to be 40 seconds, 3 minutes, 10 seconds? I've generally rendered it maybe from a few different camera angles, choose which of the 4 camera angles I think looks best.
I thought of a way to make quite a lot of money, actually. I thought of a way you could make quite a lot of money, because basically, I mean, I've done 3D printing from scanning, and it's probably taken longer to fix the model. And it basically identifies there's the problem, and then you have to manually fix it in the software. But if you've got an algorithm for going through the whole thing and fixing it automatically, that'd be brilliant.
It's more more like a rag bag, tool bag, lots of different bits of code, which different structures. I've used different ones. It's not like I press a button and it fixes them all.
You could replace mesh.
It's more maybe some things which could be plugins to RefMixer. I would say in some ways. There's also that it's principally it's volumetrically processing it. I mean, I know there's a company called Hyperganic who actually we do a bit of work with in Germany who are looking for doing like really high-end data pathways to 3D printing. I mean, they work a lot with EOS, who do these machine 3D printers that do printed titanium and things like that. One of the things that Hyperganic have done is a 3D printed titanium functional rocket engine. And one of their big things is that they are volumetrically processing all the data before, and using it as a volumetric data pathway rather than a mesh data pathway to 3D printing. So it's good company, given that I think they want about the top end industrial level. Sorry? No, the Bartlett can't. SpaceX apparently uses EOS machines to 3D print the smaller rocket engines on SpaceX rockets. So big engines are still potentially cast. Smaller engines at the directional thrusters are currently all now 3D printed.
How important is 3D printing for you in terms of materializing that? So like if you've got it and then you could turn it into a physical mold,
Mhm.
like is that connection important with actual 3D printing, or is it just a?
I quite like the story that everything is utterly, in a sense, computational, but hopefully everything looks, you know, surprisingly almost hyper-organic. I quite like that, you know, that there's this computational element all the way down the line. I think that's something that, you know, that works for me. I'm actually talking with some people at present about potentially 3D printing with mycelium, so basically like fungus-grown material. But again, it would be a computationally directed process, but using fungal material. So that works for me. I think in some ways that having a computational element I quite like.
Does something happen after, like with the
mycelium?
Mycelium, does that grow again once?
It does grow a bit, yeah. It's just effectively it's like the material that fungus structures are made out of.
Does it?
I think it does biodegrade. It's quite surprisingly structural.
Okay.
And strong, surprisingly strong, surprisingly light, surprisingly insulating. But it doesn't, you know, it's not going to last as long as concrete.
Okay.
But I mean, they are talking about this for building material for buildings.
Okay.
Mm.
Have you ever thought of viewing it in virtual or mixed reality?
Yes.
So you can actually look around the structure and see it.
Yeah, done it.
Have you?
Yeah, it's cool. I like it. I think there's a very sculptural 3D presence you get, particularly in full, good quality 6 degree of freedom. You know, so you're getting as much spatial understanding as possible. You know, so I've got a Vive at home, and it's some of these things look really nice. It's taken quite a long time. So we've got to set up an open frameworks that can view a lot of these cellular structures in with the Vive.
So you haven't put it out there for some, so I couldn't go and look at it.
Unfortunately, not yet. No. Part of the data files are a bit too big, so I can use it for an exhibition where I'm going on myself. But because the data files are so big, it's not an easy thing to download.
Maybe this is a good time to ask this is a question from Pat. It's a much bigger question. So initially asked, what are your creative intentions?
Mm-hmm.
I asked them just to expand a little bit on that before asking it. So what are your creative intentions? He says, what is Andy questioning through his work? Surely it must be much more than just showing the cells and behaviour. Mm-hmm. Is there something else going on underneath this? Now you've hinted at various things, but it's and I can pick up on a few things that you've talked about already. It's kind of this knife edge balance, this position, the idea of influencing it, being involved in it, not just trading it and letting it go, but actually wanting to be part of the process yourself. But how would you? It's a big kind of almost completely open question. What are your creative intentions?
I think that probably gets to more the core of it. I mean, I guess I'm fascinated with just the process, I guess, itself. The idea of, what sort of things come from these complex systems, complex emergence, which, like the neuron thing, like the cello factory, and sort of the VNA. I mean, I'm not just doing growth things. I'm also, now currently quite actively looking at things like, systems of connecting neurons and neural messaging and things like that, as being it's another thing which has rich, complex, interesting behaviour. So in some ways, it's the systems with that sort of behaviour, and then what's almost like the pure curiosity of, well, what does it do? And then there's the how to work with it creatively, how to work with this. What is it that was that nature's the existence proof. Nature proves that you can do astonishing things with drone style structures, with neurons, things like that. What's the possibilities that we could work with it? But I mean, is this art? Is this science? Is technology? I don't know. It's curiosity. So it could be framed as being an art question. I'm feeling a bit. I do what I do. Some people seem to be happy to call it art and put it into galleries. That's cool. People seem to be happy to invite me to come along to granular sludge conferences and present papers. That's cool. or so yeah, I mean.
So at the core of that is a curiosity, which, as you kind of explained at the beginning, is rooted from childhood, basically.
Yeah, well, certainly from my undergraduate years and things like that. So and best childhood, definitely using computers. So I was a bit too much of a geek playing with writing my own code, and then when Sinclair's computers came out in the 1980s and things like that. And then that. But yeah, I'm interested in it being aesthetics. I'm interested in the, say, almost like saying that this is a ridiculously rich substance to work with, which nature does astonishing things with it. What can we do creatively with it as humans? That's probably, which can be, create.
So in a way, it's like you use it. It isn't in a way. You've used this term yourself. You said you're collaborating with the software. You're collaborating with this material, and there's a kind of a sense of fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just enjoying this and being surprised. Yeah. Having to deal with the contingency of it. Sometimes knowing, I think I know what's going on here. I have no idea what that is, but that's interesting that you kind of just play with it.
Yeah, and you iterate and you look and reflect on it, and then it takes you off in different directions. And one thing I'll say is, the art excuse, if you like, saying I'm doing things to make exhibitable artifacts for whatever. It's a great freedom to experiment in a very free way. I think if I was having to frame it as pure science research, that would, I think, would give me a lot less freedom to experiment. So in some ways that's. I seem to have found a niche where people at least accept me. I seem to be allowed in the club. Don't tell them.
Yes.
Don't give away my secrets.
There's another question here. What draws you to the aesthetic? What aspect in particular then?
It's quite subjective. Actually, that's quite good since we may subject you into some of the next things. I mean, I try to work really quite subjectively. It's usually just saying, I don't know what is, but I like that more than I like that. Things like that. And when I am definitely interested in the ridiculously deeply ugly as well and things like that. But it's always just a very, I try to make it just a real, almost like quick review iteration. So then basically the question like parameters and that. So this is the other side, backstory to, front story is more like these simulation systems and things like that. Backstory is when I the earlier work. So this is like some stuff from the early sort of like these sort of stochastic fractals called diffusion and T aggregation. And what I was generally doing in these was a few different environmental rules effectively. So these things were growing. These ones are almost like growing in it's almost like a cylinder of water effectively. And it's almost like how much the water is stirring around. It's almost like the environment, changing the environment things growing in. So it's almost like a tree growing on a really windy treetop, or things people see with coral, where it depends how much the tide flows. If you've got really still water, the coral might grow in one way, whereas if you've got a strong tidal flow, exactly the same species of coral will often grow in totally different structures. So it's almost like being changed by its environment.
Can we just jump back and jump again, just in the hope that it might focus? Because there's something really frustrating about this camera. I've got no control of the focus.
Because try it again.
Might focus. No, don't worry.
Okay. So what I was generally doing in these was just a few parameters. So this is actually like a gravity force in the tank, and this is how much it's stirring things around into like a vortex. It's almost like those vertical washing machines. It's almost like how much it's stirring things around. And so what I generally do in these was just plot them. It's almost like try out lots of different values and plot them. And I generally have just 2 or 3 parameters, so you can do these plots. And what you often find is it's almost like these sort of tipping points. So on this one, as these vortex, almost how much how violently they're getting stirred around. if there's not much of that at all, you get these sort of cauliflower-like structures. They're being stirred around too much; it's almost shredding the structure. And somewhere between the two, well, when it gets far too much, these simulations didn't even ever stop. Yeah, so it's almost like totally shredded. The system falls over, and it's this tipping point where just before it gets to that, where you get the much more, I think, like rich, interesting, complex sort of structures sort of happening. With these cellular, sort of the systems, generally are just getting too many parameters. Even the simplest version of cellular forms are 12 parameters. The plant forms actually have 19 parameters. The hybrid forms with 2 different cell types, and you've got things 32 parameters. So I'm getting far more parameters than I can just do simple plots where 2 or 3 dimensions is basically what you can get away with. And this runs into a lovely term that's called the curse of dimensionality, which is basically just saying that as you add dimensions, numbers, parameters to it, if you want to explore the whole space, almost like explore every little niche, every value, the number of samples you're going to take goes up exponentially. So basically, if you got like those charts, I had basically 8 different values along the top and along the side. So I could do a plot of just 64 values to see how those 2 different parameters worked and which values seem to produce interesting things. If we got 10 parameters, I would need just over 1 billion samples to do a similar style plot. So by the time I just got to do 12 parameters, I'm already way above. I need about 64 billion samples to do the same density of sampling, if you like. It's just, don't even think about it. And also things that, the frustrations are that, most of the space tends to be either where nothing happens or really just predictable things happen. They often, if you're trying to look for these sort of like transition zones, the tipping points, you're potentially trying to look for a quite small, ephemeral, fragile bits, these sort of tipping of the space. How do you find those points where interesting things happen? And sort of like these boundaries between sort of regularity and chaos. So there's a frustration there. How do you actually sort of find it? One analogy I quite like is it's almost like can computers come to the rescue? Can some techniques help us? And there's a sort of like mental model story that I quite like. Is the story of what Garry Kasparov, who was the chess grandmaster, and it's about 12 years ago now, Deep Blue, so IBM came up with a ridiculously big computer.
That was 96, I think.
Deep Blue's 2000s.
Oh, right,
okay.
You're right. Yeah. He lost the first game in the 90s.
Yes, but
Deep Blue was a later.
Yeah, he flew through him by trying to outgame the computer, but a more proper challenge. Okay, let's do the problem. Now, I think it was more interesting than human beats computer. Yeah, okay. What's more interesting is saying what Garry Kasparov did next. So, have you heard of what's called hybrid chess or centaur chess? Mm-hmm. So the idea of this is, correct me if I'm wrong. The understanding of this is basically the idea is you team up a human with a computer on both sides of the chessboard actively during the game. So a lot of people use computers to help teach themselves more in a better manner chess. The idea is during the game, you've got a computer with you. So it's sort of like as a team. And what Garry Kasparov describes, he says he finds it makes chess far less paranoid, but also far more experimental. That it's almost saying that one of the big things in chess is you're afraid of making the stupid blunder. You're afraid of, you might see a move which you think, oh, I wonder what happens if I do that. But you're worried that you've missed something obvious, and then you make the move and the opponent punishes you. They just go, oh, right, yeah, checkmate. So the way that the team play often works with, if you have a computer with you, one of the things that computers are really good at, chess playing computers, is particularly finding out if something was really stupid. It's like, look, if you do that, oh yeah, it's checkmate in 4 moves. So what you do is you think of, what if I try that? And you try it out on the computer first. And if it can't see anything wrong with it, okay, maybe let's try it out. So he said, what you end up doing is you really actively experiment. You actively think of all sorts of crazy, well, what if, try it out, and if your computer can't see that there's anything wrong with it, you then play the move. So it actually in some ways makes Crescent, he says, a much more creative game by almost like having this partner that almost frees you up to experiment even more. And I quite like the idea. It's almost like other ways of having a computer to help almost like free you up to more actively experiment. So there's a lot of work being done on what's called evolutionary interfaces or interactive evolutionary computing. So the idea is almost like taking a leaf out of evolution, doing things like, I've got too many parameters. So what happens if we do things like evolution, like mutate parameters, randomly vary them, crossbreed them? I've got two that I quite like. Let's crossbreed them with each other, and end up with parameters that are some ways combinations of the two that I quite like, and things like that. It's almost like taking the lead from how evolution works and how nature works. Can you use evolutionary methods to explore parameter spaces for creative work? So quite a lot of work has been done, like Richard Dawkins working with biomorphs, William Latham and Stephen Todd's work on Mutator. There's actually a really cool book by Peter Bentley called Evolutionary Design by Computers that looks at lots of different, for music, for art, lots of different sort of things using these sort of evolutionary interfaces. They're often based on saying, well, like this, like this, like this. Now let's create a new generation based on the ones that I've just said what I've liked and things. I used evolutionary interfaces lots over the years, and I actually still do. But what I also find is they're great for some things and really rubbish at some other things. They very well, I would say, is single modal. I think they work I thought it was best as almost like displays in the gallery. There's like a interesting thing, you'll have these multiple screens and people in the gallery can touch the screens that they think things they like, and then they get more of that, more of that, more of that. What I found that if you try and work them a long time, and I think this is a lot of people in this area say the same, is they become quite frustrating. They're very difficult to influence differently. They become basically a single modal, it's almost like, and they become very trapped in niches. You find something that they're either too random, or they just find something that you've said you like a lot, and then they just give you lots of exactly that again and again and again. So they've also become trapped in a niche. And then to break it out, you just have to make it more random. Then it becomes too random. It's sort of like, I've got no idea how to control this. So what I find is they're really good, particularly for almost like early exploring the space where you haven't got much information. And they seem to be very good for what's like, well, crossbreeding things you find is really cool. Really good also for refining something, where you found something that you think is really good, but you want to find it for something even better. It's almost like slightly mutating, randomly varying, slight variations on the theme. So it's almost like it becoming trapped in a niche is a good thing, because what I want him to find is refinements within that niche. That's where they work really well. But really bad where you're particularly looking for novelty. I'm looking for something where I'm looking for something new. I don't want to just completely cast the dice again. I want to make use of everything I've found so far, but find something new, rather than just purely random. So it's almost like they're not directable enough, I find. So it's useful tools in some circumstances. On another, there's a lot of work done with evolutionary computing interfaces in the 80s, 90s sort of thing. Then there's a lot of work been done in what's called machine learning interfaces in the last sort of 15 years or so. But mostly from what I've found is, let's say, very specific systems. So they're generally about learning about a very specific way of aircraft design, or sort of space frame structures and architecture, or Neil and Mitra have done stuff on furniture design, which was like flat pack furniture and what works, what doesn't work, and using machine learning to rapidly say, well, that won't quite work, but here's something close by which will work. So, but generally they're about you spend a lot of time training them in almost like engineering simulations for a very specific system, and then it's almost more like a interactive aid to do some things which will likely to work engineering-wise, but I can do experiment interactive speeds rather than every time I try something, I need to then set it off overnight and then see results in the morning. So it's almost like getting you approximate but close to simulation results by a machine learning algorithm having been trained on lots of engineering simulations. But I think there's something that was particularly interesting about sort of machine learning is almost like possibilities for almost like learning what you're doing, learning what you like and don't like. It's like learning about your preferences. I think machine learning has a lot of interesting possibility. So what I'm sort of thinking is almost like what I want is a system that allows almost like doing different things. Almost like when I first starting with the system, I just want to randomly try out a few different things. Once I've found a few things that work, I maybe want to steer towards areas of things that seem to be working and away from areas that really don't seem to be working. You'd maybe using some evolutionary style techniques. And it's always saying that as you're almost like working with something, it's almost like depends on my mood, different days, or I'm looking for different things, or I'm doing something, I'm close to an exhibition. What I want to do is do some, are there new close things to that, but maybe a bit, different or a bit more interesting. But other times I might be looking for completely novel results. It's almost like I want something, and particularly it's almost like I want something that can be steered based on my intention. It's like, what am I looking for today? Might be very different from what I was looking for yesterday. So how do I have a system that allows me to explore differently? And so this has been the sort of, and this is the idea of like machine learning is where potentially you can do things like totally new points in the space, so almost like totally new parameter points. Can I use machine learning to at least have a prediction of what it would do at totally new points before I actually generate it so really fast? What it might be is a really bad prediction, but maybe it's almost like the best prediction based on all the data I've given it so far. And hopefully maybe more, as I give it more and more data, it's going to learn better and better and better. So what I'm finding is that when I first start out with the system, machine learning is usually really rubbish, because I haven't told it enough yet. It hasn't got enough data to work on. But as you give it more and more, as you work with it over generally weeks of trying things out, machine learning has the potential to start to learn and then start to be more and more productive, which actually feels nice. It's nice cool. So sort of like so what I've actually created is a sort of like basically an interface with and a framework that I can use a number of different systems. It's quite easy to make plugins to this where I can sort of say, hey, here's a new idea how to generate new parameters. I can write this into here, and what I do is this system can choose parameters for setting things up like these cellular growth systems. And then when it's done something, I get things like pictures back, and I can do things like rate these. This is me generally just rating these myself. I'm looking at this and saying, I'll give that a 5 out of 10. Or I'll give that, actually that's rubbish. These are ones where it's failed. It's just, it hasn't produced anything interesting at all down the bottom. And then I'm sort of like giving these, I'll give that a 2, I'll give that a 3, I'll give that a 4.
And a question, what's the fitness like? Is it aesthetic, conceptual, novelty? What are you looking for? How are you rating them?
Whatever takes my mood, and I can do it in different ways. I can have multiple score sets. I could have, so it starts with just a score set called score, which is generally just me going, oh, I'll give that a 5 sort of intuitive aesthetics. But if I see something, particular feature I like, maybe like tendriliness, oh, I've seen tendrils, I quite like that. Maybe I should score them on how tendrily they are. I can then create a second score set, which is tendriliness, where I can then, ones which are really tendrily, I can then give high scores, and then I can ask the machine learning system to find me things which are predicted high score and high tendriliness. And that's the idea. So basically, I'm generally rating and also categorizing. I can also, in the interface, put things into groups. I can say, these things look like broccolis, these things look like asparaguses, these things look like corals, these things look like plants, or just category A, B, C, D, whatever. But I can put things into categories. And I can then use, basically the machine learning can start to predict the ratings and the categories. And I can use that to start to search the space. So it's sort of, so it's the, they can be whatever I want. Or they can be engineering simulations. I can run, say, a simulation, which could be just, will this structurally work or not? So the value could be, I generally haven't been doing that, but I could plug it in so that it's the computer itself comes up with, a simulation value, which goes into the, actually one thing I have done in this is how long it takes to run the simulation. That could be a score value. So I don't want things that take too long to simulate because they take too long.
You're answering these questions as they come through. So,
okay.
like, do you have external criteria? Which you mentioned various things there, including just the practicality of how long it takes.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only, apart from the new stuff that I'm going to get to talk about right at the end here, that's the only rated criteria I've used that's just been purely computer scored. The simulation takes 10 minutes. Okay, that gives a score, or whatever. But basically, it's an interface, and also it's hotkeys. The idea is I'm making about 200 things generated overnight. So that's generally my thing. Instead of just running one, I'm generating a few hundred in each batch, and then I'm going 3, 4, 5, just a couple of seconds each. So yes, I think 0, 0, 0, 4, and then that's information I can then use to generate the next thing. And it's what I'm using is a number of different techniques. So just purely random sampling, so usually at the beginning, mutation, cross-breeding, what's machine learning techniques, what I'm generally using so far is what's called k-nearest neighbors or radial basis functions. But basically, I almost put a number of different tools into the tool bag, and then I've sort of learnt which ones seem to work depending whether I'm looking for, refining something specific or looking for something really quite novel. In some ways, generally novelty is where machine learning seems to work. It's almost like I want to find something novel, but not that's, but avoiding the things that I've already found are just complete rubbish. So it's novelty guiding towards the interesting areas of the space. That makes sense. So what I want to find is, so almost like this is a very separate use of the computer. It's a separate program from my simulation. All the Species Explorer does is produce parameters. A set of parameters to try, and it sets off, and it writes a file out to disk, and my simulation software picks up that file, saying, okay, I'm trying parameters, values, 0.3, 0.7, 0.5, runs the simulation, and it generates a picture, and then the picture comes back into here. So they're two totally separate programs. But basically, almost anything with a reason, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 parameters, I could then plug into this system. I've plugged quite a few different things in now, and I've also had some people at the bar some students and one of the other tutors try this out for some of the other projects, so we've used this on a few other things. You plug various things into it, and it feels more like an assistant. It's almost like, it feels like the simulation is almost like the clay, the material that I'm using to generate artworks with, the material I'm exploring, where this feels more like the collaborator, almost more like, and particularly the machine learning side. So it feels, maybe this is anthropomorphizing things too much, but it does feel like, pretty often, you work with this for a few weeks, showing, saying, give that a 5, give that a 10, and it starts getting better and better at showing you interesting stuff, coming back with, rather than, 90%, 9 out of 10 is just complete rubbish, and only maybe 1 in 100 is at all really interesting. And then you start to get, it starts feeling like you're exploring the space. It feels like an assistant, particularly when you've got too many parameters for me to get my small head around. But then, I can start to say, information almost as subjective as just saying, I like this and don't like that. It seems to be useful, increasingly useful with the system. It's a big thing. So this is, it's an active sort of work in progress. So I actually I haven't actually done that much in Species Explorer the last 2-3 years, but I've actually now, the main thing I'm sort of doing a lot more on. So I'm actually doing a project together with John McCormack, who you might know. He's actually a computational artist in his own right, does quite cool, interesting work. That's John on the right there, at the top. He runs a group called Sensi Lab down at Monash in Melbourne. So he invited me to go down there back in April, spent a few weeks down there. It's a really cool place. ridiculously cool architecturally designed research space and ridiculous amounts of kit around. And it's, St John's lovely, it's great. So basically we're doing a project to say, can we use dog and things like that? Can we use CNNs and other more advanced neural-based machine learning techniques to almost like take this style of computer collaboration for creatively exploring spaces even further? In particular, sort of things like these transition points, where basically the sort of core idea is that categorizing things is probably what makes a lot of sense to like find these transition points. Almost like if you sort of categorize this space as being, these are cauliflowers, these are things that have been shredded. Well, things between cauliflower and shredded, that's what I'm usually looking for. The horribleness of reality is it's a bit of a pain in the arse trying to categorize things. It's almost like subjectively rating things when you start with a system is quite natural, or rating or finding a few tendrils and then starting to do tendering things. But you start to see quite late on in the process the sort of natural categories for things. So it's almost like a late stage of the iterations where you start wanting to get into categorization. And you might have a few thousand samples by then. And it's, and also you want to be able to categorize and change around the categories quite really flexibly. Or maybe you want to change that category a bit, or split that category into 2 subcategories, try things out, be experimental with the categories. And hand categorizing the data is just takes too long. It's too onerous. It's so the reality was I set up a lot of software to do searches of the space based on categories, and I would be reluctant to use them because it was just too much to do. So the big thing is, can almost like machine learning help categorize the things? And then even deeper, almost like if we've got this sort of like machine learning system that's can start to try to categorize it, then asking it for things like, well, when does it become confused? When does it look at things and it's got no idea what that means because it's so unlike anything it's seen before? Maybe that in itself is interesting. It's almost a way of expressing the unexpected, expressing the, it can't recognize features in this, comparing them with anything the system's generated before. That's probably something really interesting. Maybe that's something that I would like to have a look at. So it's both saying, can machine learning be used almost like as a collaborative tool to help me categorize things in a much more flexible, experimental, a bit like Garry Kasparov with the computer alongside him playing chess. And also, just if you've got a machine learning algorithm that can score categories and score uncertainty effectively, can we almost like actively look for uncertainty as being a particularly creatively interesting thing to look for in the system? So it's a work in it's a research project in progress, but it does seem to be working. So this is unpublished, so don't repost these. I hope that. John's currently writing sort of papers about these and stuff. But things like this is us taking what's called ResNet 50, which is a classic, reasonably state-of-the-art image-based machine learning, sort of convolutional neural network. And this is, what we find is I can categorize a few examples, and then it gets really quite quick, good at recognizing examples. So this is it saying, okay, well, actually, this is me categorizing a few things as balloons, brains, and things like that. And then this is it having come back as saying, it's looked at that and it's decided that's a brain, that's an animal, that's a, categories with the red areas are showing the bits where what was it in the picture that made it really convinced that that was a, thing I'd said was a brain. So the results are, it does seem to work really well. I can just give it a few examples and it really rapidly learns, which is nice. So I can just give a few things and then, hey, and then what I've now come up with is the interface, so I can then see where's it going wrong and correct a few things. So it's sort of like it's got 70% right, but so that's got that wrong, that got that really wrong. And so it's almost like an interface to help make it easy to categorize and easy to change categories and easy to correct it, so that I'm not overtraining it. I'm just giving it, and I can easily see, have I given it enough information yet? No, it's still getting a few things wrong. Actually, that's enough. It's got it right now. Great, cool. You know, or is there one category? Most of it's working with this one category. It's still really confused by it, so I need to focus on giving it more training. So it's almost like guides me a bit to where do I need to train it better.
So you're still actively involved. That's the point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In some ways, it feels like I'm actively involved. I'm seeing stuff. I'm seeing it shows me like Watson by confidence. So it sort of shows it thinks these are all brains. This is the thing that's really confident that's a brain. This is the thing where it thinks it's a brain, but it thinks it might be close to being something else. So it's almost I'm seeing its range of confidence. And if I'm seeing the things that it's confidently saying that it's a brain, and it really isn't, that's when it's, no, I really need to correct it. If it's seeing something that it thinks is a brain, but actually I'm looking at going, yeah, it's a bit brain-like, but it's a bit other-like as well. But actually that's correct, actually. It's seeing that as being it thinks it's a brain, but it's a bit close to being something else. That's good. But so I'm seeing data like that, which helps me just know where to correct it, really. Another thing also, just almost like confirming, almost coming up with lots of things saying these are brains and these are broccolis, and I can just go through them and going, yeah. That's really quick for me to do. Me separating things into lots of different categories is quite tough, but just confirming, yeah, it's got all those right, it's got all those right, apart from that one, it's really quick. And also, we're actually working with John, subdividing category. If I've got this category, it seems to be that seems to be too big. Can I use machine learning to almost say, what would the computer suggest as almost like separating those out? Actually, that sort of does make sense, So it's sort of, there's quite a lot of different layers to it. And another thing we do in this is almost like deliberately looking at these transitions. This is actually a search where I've trained it to say which things are in categories, and then it's chosen one, and we can work on a binary chop search. So basically, it's trying to look deliberately for a thing that's between two categories, right? So it's sort of saying, okay, it chooses two existing ones. So I've got one which is being categorized as a balloon, another one that's being categorized as animal, whatever. And then what it's just doing is literally looking at things halfway between the two in parameters, and then generates that. And then this is all automatic. The machine learning system looks at that thing and then says, oh, that still looks like an animal. That looks like an animal. Therefore, now let's look halfway between, let's look between the balloon and the animal. So it was like, let's look to the left of that one. Okay, so then halfway between that, so no, that's a balloon. So now let's look between these two. Oh, that looks like an animal. Let's look between half of these two. Oh, that's starting to look a bit strange. Basically, it's looking for where does balloon turn into animal. And it's produced something which is, actually potentially an interesting crossbreed, hybrids. Often it doesn't work, but sometimes it does. It might be that these two categories don't have a transition, or it might be that there's just a really smooth and rather boring, very gentle transition. Or it might be that there's something that happens between the two that you end up with something like this, where bits of the structure of one property, bits of structure of another property. Well, sometimes what you find is that there's actually something really different happens. So in some ways but at least what it can do is it comes up with potential things. It's coming up with, what happens as balloon turns into animal if balloon does turn into animal?
So are you? Hang on. I've got to jump in with this. So I think this is great. Balloons turn into animals at a children's party.
My job's done.
Yes,
Thanks with that.
Sorry.
I don't think I can front that. Yeah, I need to. I think that's what I should get into is children's parties.
Just shape balloons into poodles.
Yeah.
Sorry, Terry. That was
We
probably a
need a
serious
new
question.
category, which is balloon animal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm saying this is balloon animal, but I think that the kids might be a bit terrified.
Yeah.
Like this is balloon animal.
Sorry. I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned autonomy. I saw that you trying to design some algorithm like the GA, the KN, they're all unsupervised algorithm. So does it mean that you use this algorithm to express the non-autonomy form? Or so I study mathematics, so I know that you should design features during you design the machine learning. So what is the features, or what is have you used some feature engineering techniques?
Okay, I guess there's things like novelty search and things like that, which is very much based on trying to like specify a low-dimensional feature, and then that almost like saying, can you find things distributed in that feature space? One thing I think is quite difficult on this is, knowing what the features are. What would be a feature vector? There is some work on, after you have provided a certain amount of supervised training, what are the natural feature vectors and the principal components of the feature vector coming out of the system. So that's actually one of the things that John's working on at present is is like 2D plots, so that you categorize lots of things, and then what you're looking at is on the feature vector part of the neural net system, is there a natural 2D, almost plot like my early plots where I just have two values? Can you use that to provide a 2D plot which is human sensible based on the feature vector space? So that's one thing that John has been doing some tests on, and I think might be really interesting for things like I've got an initial categorization, or I've already got a category and I'm thinking about breaking this into 2 or 3 subcategories. So that's sort of less supervised. It's almost like based on some supervision has gone into initial training, then it's saying within those categories, what's the natural distributions unsupervised within them? That's sort of my understanding. So I guess I'm interested. I'm more interested in me providing a certain supervision. I guess it's not a fundamental thing, but I'm interested in my input to the system and me being involved in the loop and the process and me guiding it. And then a natural way to do that is me providing what in machine learning terms is supervised data. But I guess using a convolutional neural net to provide how it thinks the feature vectors within a category would be most naturally widely feature vectors distributed as being a potential hint to could this be a good way of subcategorizing that's probably the closest to getting to that. Certainly when people was asking, I probably looking at wanting to use unsupervised learning rather than supervised. That's sort of what it's saying?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's sort of, in essence, almost no, because I like supervising, because that feels like that's me in the loop. But I'm interested in, less supervision than me. So it's sort of, minimally supervised, I guess, is what I was going for.
Or is it kind of making it that your supervision is the bits that are, I was going to say the bits more interesting, but actually some of it isn't. It's just you getting accuracy to the system.
I feel it's more than a steering to it. I mean, it's like we just randomly generated things and categorized things. It would probably come up with some categories, but it would be. I don't think it would be. Why would it search for the more interesting behavior? What would make it do that? But there are interesting questions. There's certainly this. I think this is going to be an ongoing project, and it has the potential to become less supervised. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Well, that opens up a whole other discussion, doesn't it? because one of the interesting things with the chess thing is that like I've done similar things, not at Kasparov level by any means, but using chess computers. And what you do is you feel absolutely confident that I'm not making a mistake, which there's obvious mistakes within chess. And therefore, I then can have more fun with it. Literally have more fun. That's how very simple level how I've used exactly that thing. So, but it's still me involved. So if it does become completely where the machine learning is able to do categorization, find novelty, find that feels a long way off, but it feels like it's a really intriguing philosophical challenge to deal with as well.
I guess, but a few things like I remember when I programmed a computer to play, just Minesweeper, the old game that ships with Windows. It's probably one of the greatest things to make you never want to play Minesweeper ever again. You just see the computer does it.
It just does it. So.
I'm interested in me being the loop. But there are. And John, I think, is a bit halfway between the two. One thing when I was actually down in Melbourne this year that John did was he actually did do a GAN. So, that was GAN day. He did do a GAN trained on a lot of my images to see whether what would a GAN do to produce Andy Lomas-esque looking things. And it did produce some Andy Lomas-esque looking things, which is really quite the interesting question of how do I feel about this? And it was like, I actually need to think about this. It was a fun thing to have to think about. And one thing I will say, it is important to me the process that this has come from, these really, growth-like, complex behavior process. That is really, it reinforced that to me. It's almost like seeing these things, and it's almost like what that feels like is someone is drawing something that looks a bit like my stuff, but it comes from an utterly, totally different process. And so yes, it's a fake and a fake in the way of it utterly not having the core. But yeah, it was interesting seeing them. They were just like, So there's a similar. John's also doing work with Simon Colton, so a guy, researcher who does lots of work on purely completely autonomous creativity. So we all feel they're like we're nudging towards that. But yeah, but in some ways I'm potentially interested in saying, well, let's go towards that. But then does that give us even more things for a human to work with as well? A bit like Kasparov, firstly it's the computer to autonomously beat you at chess, and next thing becomes the rich collaborator.
When you've made these things and you put them in the gallery, do you just let them stand by themselves, or is it important that people looking at them understand some of the process of how you created them?
The way I feel about it is a bit of both. I don't like I like the idea that hopefully almost everything I've made, you don't have to know those. Hopefully they're interesting in their own right. I want that. Hopefully I get that. Hopefully it's intriguing. But if somebody wants to know, I'm not trying to hide that. I'm actually interested in letting people know what the deeper story, if people want to know that, because I think that does bring another, hopefully does reinforce the idea that adds to the work. But I don't like the idea that it's, unless you understand it, it's inaccessible.
I would completely agree. From having seen the work, you don't need to know. But partly because it's so well made, I think that's really is part of it. Is that like the two screens with the mirrors and the kind of the holes for the eyes, the hazmat lenses in, but the construction of it was just done to the point where I was drawn in by it, because not just because the imagery was interesting, but it was just the whole thing was just beautifully constructed and built, and that was as important as the content of the work in the physical space. Same with the 3D prints.
Yeah.
You know, and the other illustrations I've seen. In fact, there was stuff you had at Waterman's. In fact, is that piece at Waterman's?
No, there was actually the whole big ridiculous thing in the middle.
Yes,
that was a stereo viewer.
Yes, that was
quite a few stereo viewers over the years.
So it's different scales as well. But it's, you know, the materials are right. They're constructed well. There's attention to details, which mean that they become intriguing objects in themselves, which you want to engage with, to look at, and then possibly find out more.
Yeah,
but not necessarily. I would say from experience very much that's the case.
I like the idea of different people get different things out of it. No, actually, that's cool.
I must admit, I came with it the same way the second time I'd seen it, because I'd seen it before, and then I saw it on an exhibition. I was going, oh, remake that.
Next thing is Waterman's exhibition. Yes. There you are, segment. Waterman's a few years ago. Which this thing in the middle was actually a huge stereo viewer. So we didn't
just
have.
For a second, can we switch the lights up again? Just because it reflects on the screen, just as the last image for everybody. Let's just.
So we can't quite see this picture, but it's basically like two projector screens, and then there's this little thing on, like it's mirrors on a pole in the middle. We didn't have anything that said "look here."
Yeah.
But if you looked into the mirrors correctly, it basically works as a stereo viewer. People started tweeting each other, going, "Hey, did you have a look at the mirrors?" And people say, "What mirrors? Go back and have a look at the mirrors." They go, "Whoa, I had a look at the mirrors." Got a nice little, additional thing if people engage with the exhibition enough almost.
Come on.
And hopefully, I liked it. You could just walk around and it was these animations happening on big projections in this quite dark gallery, and it was hopefully just interesting for that. But the actual two screens, they almost looked like they were just the same image. There actually was a left eye and a right eye, and it was only if you engaged with enough. You may found that. I quite like that. I like about, I guess, rewarding people who want to engage with it further. I like, but I also like making sure that there's, it's almost like, how do you hook someone? It's sort of talk a lot to the Goldsmith people, almost like, it's almost like thinking almost like a game, thinking like a coach. How do you sort of hook somebody? And then how do you reward them?
Do you ever produce something that you think is interesting, but you think other people won't find it interesting? Is there a difference between that?
Yeah, I'll think on that. No, nothing's coming immediately to mind. I mean, I have got a few things where, obviously, is that idea too obtuse? I mean, one idea that I still haven't found was like how to express it artistically in a meaningful enough way, but it's almost this fragility of, between order and chaos. And there's this idea that there's a related idea of what's called entropy dissipation. So this is where it's almost like, is this too much of an esoteric scientific idea? The idea that life only exists, well, there's this almost like a big rule from physics of thermodynamics, everything heads towards entropy, it's second law of science, thermodynamics, that basically entropy always increases. So it's almost like disorder always increases. How do you end up with life in a universe where disorder always increases? And the idea is that there's studies of this. This is not me and Max will just go off and have dinner together and go, and entropy dissipation systems. Why don't more people think that they are the most beautiful thing in the universe? The idea that if you've got a energy gradient, you've got things like sun, something really hot, something really cold, the earth. That allows complexity to happen. So it's all, but there's a real ephemerality about it. There's a real, effectively, when almost exactly the same as vortices in water, or the vortex in the water going out like hole is that. and that, as long as you've got the flowing water, if the conditions are right, they can have really rich, complex vortices in them. But another almost irony almost about it is that what happens with any of these systems, so you need to have these energy gradients for these rich, complex systems to happen. But what comes out of the physics is they're almost always they're basically guaranteed to be self-destructive. That what they do, the reason they become allowed to exist, because they dissipate entropy from one place to another. They actually create even more disorder somewhere else. We have to eat lots of food and break food down to keep ourselves as structures. And the net result is that entropy decreases even quicker. That there's someone worked out that almost like whenever you have one of these entropy dissipation systems, like a living organism, the net result in our system as a whole is the disorder is actually increasing even quicker than it would have done without this thing in the system to start with. So there's this most beautiful fragility that we're just almost like little crests of wave fronts of little vortices. That's all life is. Yeah, that's the idea. Whether so ultimately, Max is doing that into music, and bless him. I mean, it's always maybe music's more appropriate medium. I don't know whether people read that from his music, but that's like the sort of idea that he's playing with in his music. But better do that in my life. I don't know yet. Or am I already?
Yeah.
This work is already in some ways.
Well, yeah, in some ways it is because like the influences of these disparate ideas are rooted in it, and for you that's important.
Yeah.
Not necessarily for the viewer.
Yeah. And that's why it being a gang doesn't work. My code is an entropy dissipating system.
Yeah.
Yay.
But it's also crucial that you're involved in it.
Yeah.
And that's not to say someone else might set up something different, but for you, that's rooted in you, the creator, the maker, is that you're part of this process, influencing and shaping.
Yeah. So saying nature does this already. How we do it, and maybe we do it differently. It's like we don't just have to slavishly follow nature.
That's a good place to end, I think. We don't have to slavishly follow nature.
That's my last slide.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is why I've got my email address.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm going to actually stop the live stream right now, otherwise the mic hits. I'm hoping it's recorded, but it will only be on a private YouTube list for students. So
that's cool.
There'll be nothing public there.
Happy to tell you a little bit about it, but yeah, that latest research.
Yay! You do get entropy. There you go. So we'll end it there. Thank you very much.